Hello everybody, it's your boy the Chaotic One, and yesterday I did a video talking about the multi-party America and what the major parties could look like. However, in a multi-party America there would still be a good set of fringe parties that might get enough state legislatures in, or maybe a mayoralship here and there, but they probably won't do well nationwide, unlike the other 10 major parties. So these are the parties that would get less than 1% nationwide, however they might do well in some parts of the country to where, like I said, they get a state legislature or two, maybe a mayoralship, um, possibly. And there is a chance that these parties could win nation or statewide, but it'd be extremely rare. But of course, and you might look at some of these parties and be like, well, that should be a major party. However, I'll explain why they're not. There's about 7 parties, so let's take a look at the first one, which is the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party would be your socially liberal, economically liberal party. It would be a majorly socialist party, more so than your progressive or green parties, or the major parties. It'd be very authoritarian. They would want to replace the capitalist economy with a socialist one. They'd be very high on protectionist trade. They'd be very high on isolationism, not wanting to get involved with wars. They would want universal health care, and they'd be very high on defunding the police. So the reason why this party won't do as well is because it's very radical. The whole defund the police thing is not very popular. And if you identify as a socialist, you may just want to join the Green Party or the Progressive Party, since they do well nationwide. And the Socialist Party is not really that is one of the more so fringe parties. Of course, you might see, they most likely get ballot access in like LA or New York City, maybe Seattle, parts of the country where there is large urban centers. So they get ballot access there, but they probably get at most 3% there. So, like, they probably, again, you might see a state legislature that's part of the Socialist Party, but you will probably never see a major party contender via the Socialist Party. And if anyone from the Socialist Party really wanted to compete nationwide, they would just, go to the Green Party if they really cared about the environmental issue, or they would just join the Progressive Party and try to make that a bit more far to the left. Um, Next up is the Nationalist Party. This is the far right party, as the Socialist Party would be the far left party. The party would be socially and economically conservative. They'd be very isolationist. They would also support protectionism. They'd want tax cuts, however, they'd be very high on regulation on businesses, and they would also have libertarian economics such as balanced budgets, reducing government spending. They would support a net zero abortion, so they would just want no abortion in the country. They'd be very against LGBTQ policies. They'd always vote against it. They would support constitutional carry, so you can hold a gun without a permit. And they'd be very authoritarian. Again, you definitely would see nationalists of this party flock to the Patriot Party if they really wanted to compete in nationwide. However, this party would probably do well statewide in certain areas like Idaho, the Dakotas, the plain states, but probably not enough to where, they win statewide because they're just super far to the right. Um, the left wing parties, whoever's in charge, like the Democrats, they'd have to do very poorly, like a approval in the 20s so far for the Nationalist Party to even win seats in Congress. But even then, it's a very big stretch. Um, but yeah, this would be your far right party. I can imagine people like Kelly Ward or Wendy Rogers, Doug Mastriano being part of the Nationalist Party. Weird, but since they're not nationalists, they're pretty far right. Next is your pro-state independence party. These are your parties that want secession from the United States. You definitely see this all across the country. These parties won't do well statewide. They probably won't even have seats in state legislatures, but they're still prominent enough to where they still need to be mentioned. You probably see this in states like Alaska, Hawaii, California, Texas, New Hampshire, states that, secession is talked about a lot. You might see it in Oregon as well. Yeah, they'd be very high on state nationalism. So, like Alaska, they'd be very, patriotic about their state. They are against the government, the federal government controlling everything over the states, so they would very be in favor of the 10th Amendment. They would support protectionism for their own state supplies. very anti-authoritarian. They want secure borders. They also want electoral reform as well as tax reform, as these parties might believe that their states are being taxed on unfairly. I don't know why it took me so long to figure that word out. Next up would be the Keystone Party. This party would be socially moderate, economically libertarian. It'd be very syncretic politics, which means this party would be a bipartisan party trying to figure out how to get things done with all the other parties, the best way possible. So if, let's say, a governor was elected from the Keystone Party, they'd more than likely try to get as many votes as possible. Um, they try to work with everyone from every party to get the best outcome possible, which would take longer for bills to get passed. This party would be very against corruption, so if corruption would occur, they'd, be on the front lines to fight it. They'd want electoral reform as well. They'd prefer laissez-faire capitalism, try to be as hands-offish as possible. However, they'd also be very high on cryptocurrency, and we'd also have a hint of libertarianism in there as well. Keystone Party would not want to be too involved in the lives of, individuals, and they'd be very high on free trade as well, which, is probably a reason why the Keystone Party wouldn't do as well. Again, you'll definitely see this party do well in parts of the country where libertarianism is very favorable, as well as certain parts of the Rust Belt, and maybe rural, dense college towns as well. College towns that are very red but very packed, which do exist but very far and few between. Next up, the Federalist Party. This party would still exist in a multi-party America. However, it'd go from a major party to just a fringe party. However, it'd still be relative enough to where, again, they'd have state legislatures. This is a party for the Federalist Society, your Federalist Society judges, or Federalist Society Republicans, whatever you call it. They'd be socially moderate, economically conservative, with some libertarian economics in there. They'd be very high on republicanism rather than democracy. They'd support family values, which may or may not include LGBT individuals. It just depends on the politician. They'd support safe, legal, and rare abortion, probably around 15 weeks. They'd want secure borders, but they'd also support amnesty, to boost the economy. They'd be very high on free trade as well as the free markets, and they'd also have a very tough on crime attitude, so they're not lax at all on drug issues. So if you do a nonviolent crime, it's treated as a violent crime, which is not good, in my opinion. Next up, the Whig Party. This party would be the antithesis, be the third incarnation from the previous Whig Party, which was dubbed the modern Whig Party. You're a socially conservative, economically populist party, very anti-authoritarian. However, they'd be very high on small government. Right-wing nationalism would also be a heavy presence in the Whig Party. They'd also support abolishing the presidency and just having the House of Representatives. And it really depends. Some might want to get rid of the Senate as well. Some might want to keep it as like a rubber stamp on the House and the Prime Minister, as they'd support a parliamentary system, like several other countries. They'd also be high on isolationism, dealing with own matters of the country. They'd support free trade as well as a secure border. And finally, the Worker Labor Party. This is a party that on paper should do well nationwide, but however, most people who would be a part of this party might just join the Maverick Party. They'd be a very socially liberal, economically populist party. This would be the brand of left-wing nationalism in the party, which, if you look across the world, left-wing nationalism works very well for liberals. It's very high in other countries and very popular. This party would be very anti-authoritarian, high on protectionism. They'd support universal health care. Again, they'd support isolationism. They would have some sort of libertarian economics. Maybe they want, deregulation, but also they want to reduce government spending, as well as balancing the budget since debt is not great. They also support safe, legal, and rare abortion up to around 25 weeks. So these are the fringe parties of the United States under a multi-party system. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.